Welcome to Convocation. I'm very excited this afternoon to be able to introduce to you Dr. Srilatha SIngh. Dr. Singh is the founder and artistic director of Chitrakaavya Dance, a Salt Lake City-based nonprofit that conceptualizes movement as visual poetry. As I was looking through her bio that she sent me, which we use for advertising purposes, I noticed that she has a Ph.D. in mathematics. And I was really excited about this because many of you know my husband teaches math here at Snow College. And I said, oh, her mathematics PhD is in three-manifold topology, which deals with geometry of spaces. And I said, you know, what is that? Can you explain that to me? And he said, oh, you know, when I was a graduate student, I signed up for a topology class and I had to drop it because it was too difficult. So kind of cool. Now, she says she doesn't necessarily use math a whole lot anymore, but I'm still very excited about that. She talked about how dance and math both have aesthetics, and she is able to make a connection between those. So as we think about what we're doing here in Convocation, where we're trying to see the connections between different disciplines, I think this is an excellent opportunity to observe that in action. She enjoys choreographing to new and unexplored themes and teaching and presenting mythology, rhythm, mathematics, poetry, and theater, all through the medium of Bharatanatyam. I hope she says that for you so that you don't have to take my pronunciation, which is a classical style of Indian dance. She has guest taught at Weber State University, University of Utah, Westminster College, Utah Valley University, and has presented in many venues, including the Living Traditions Festival, as well as other local cultural festivals. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Singh.
Okay, I hope there's no feedback if I'm back here. Yep, okay. Good afternoon, namaste. And thank you, Cheryl, for having me here. It's truly a privilege and honor to come and speak in a guest lecture series in a series like Convocation. It's a fairly unique class. After I was invited to speak here, I've been going back and watching all of the televised lectures, and you guys have a brilliant set of speakers who've come and talked to you. So I feel honored to be part of those. I hope that you will take away some of the philosophy and abstraction that's part of the remit of your courses from today's presentation as well. Yeah, I don't use mathematics a lot anymore. I'm doing something far more mundane, like stock selection. Because I work for a quantitative investment firm as my day job. So everything I'm talking to you today is my passion, my hobby, but it does not pay the bills. I will just say that. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit at the end of the presentation. Okay, so Bharatanatyam, that's the name of the Indian classical dance form that I'm here to talk to you about. And we'll talk a little bit about the history, the vocabulary, and the relevance to modern identity, especially for the students that I end up teaching, who are 90% of them are born and brought up here. They are really Indian Americans. Many of them are not, have no ethnic connection to India, but are interested in the culture. But for those who are of Indian origin, there is something about this dance form that helps them to keep in touch with their roots and their cultural heritage. And I'll address that a little bit towards the end. So, what is Bharatanatyam? It's an Indian classical dance, and I'm purposely emphasizing the word classical because at least in India we do distinguish between the idea of classical versus folk. And what is the difference? It's sort of hard to narrow down. It's not a question of one is easier than the other. The best that I can say, and this is just through observation, and I don't know, maybe all of you have your own ideas on what would distinguish something that's classical versus something that's folk. Certainly in classical music, we understand something that's classical versus pop. And in Western dance traditions as well, presumably ballet is considered classical, maybe jazz, but there may be other things that are not considered classical. Ballroom dancing, for example. The similar sort of, I would say, distinctions, and see whether the kind of things that I'm saying make sense, even from the framework that you already have, a reference that you have. Classical seems to involve very clear boundaries of technique, whether it's technique of playing the piano, fingering your violin, however you do the music, create the music. It seems to have, similarly for dance, there's a very clear emphasis on technique in anything that's classical. So the vocabulary is extremely well defined. The second thing that seems to distinguish classical from, I would say, folk, at least in India, is the performative versus participative. So if you can simply participate in a public gathering where everybody is together dancing something, we would call that more folk. And we have loads of really interesting and beautiful folk art forms and dance forms. But classical is something which is usually much more performative. Not everybody's going to sit and perform it. Most of the people are the audience, and then the performer is the artist. So that's what classical sort of is referring to here. And, feel free to disagree with that notion. And again, this does not mean better. It's not a value judgment. It's just a classification system. So Bharatanatyam, along with 7 other dance forms, are considered classical dance forms in India. And each of these has a regional origin. So Bharatanatyam comes from the south of India. There's about 3 more that come from the south. There's Kuchipudi, which is very similar. There's Mohiniyattam. There's Kathakali. Each of these dance forms comes from the south, have slightly different geometries, slightly different emphasis. Kathakali, for example, is almost entirely the use of the face with elaborate masks, and really the emphasis is on how much you can make your face speak. And then in the east of India, the northern and eastern side, we have from Orissa, Odissi, which is another beautiful dance form, really temple sculpturesque. And then in the north, we have Kathak. And then further northeast, we have Satriya and Manipuri, both of which are more recent additions, I would say, to the classical dance forms. So what about Bharatanatyam? So this name, Bha for Bhava, which means emotional expression, Ra for Raga, which is music, melodic delineation, Ta for Tala, which is rhythmic structure, and then Natyam, which means dance. So you put them all together and you get a dance which emphasizes rhythmic structure, emotes and expresses, and uses the melodic landscape to get the meaning across through dance. That's Bharatanatyam. Alternatively, another original sort of for the name is that the Natya Shastra, which is an ancient text, was authored by the sage Bharata Muni, we call him. So the dance that's described in this text is Bharatanatyam. That's another way of thinking about it, but that particular origin is since no longer considered valid, because almost all the Indian classical dance forms attribute their origin to the same text, Natya Shastra. So, and depending on what they emphasize, they take certain parts of the text. And so it's true that Natya Shastra is the origin of all Indian classical dance forms. Bharatanatyam in particular is actually a The precursor was something called sadir or dasi atam. Then these were dance forms that existed in South India and Tamil Nadu for 2000 years. And they were practiced by temple dancers. The word deva dasi, deva is a temple or god, dasi means servant. So the servants of God, these dancers were consecrated to the temples. And this tradition has been around for a long time. I've put in two images here. The one on the top is Lord Shiva. He's one of the Hindu trinity, and he himself is a dancer. In fact, he's supposed to be the origin of the dance form. So we specifically pay obeisance to him before we begin our dance. And the one below is just some temple sculptures, and these temples are also very, very old. The reason to put these images is to show that even though we don't necessarily have written texts, because India had a lot of oral tradition, a lot of history of India was passed orally. So you're not necessarily going to find something written from 300 BC, which is going to tell you that, oh, here was the dance form. But you can see that it's there in the sculptures. And these sculptures have been carbon dated. These temples are really old, and they do have dancers and dance in various forms in these temples. So we know that the dance existed. The earliest before I go to that, the history of Bharatanatyam is as the history of every dance form. If you look at ballet, it's probably the same thing. There's something about the French, the Russian codes, all of that, which is going to inform what is the way in which ballet developed. It did not develop in a vacuum. The same thing is true of Bharatanatyam. It did not develop in a vacuum. So there's art, architecture, literature, music, all of which together combine to create the framework, the context in which this dance form was discovered, created, adapted, evolved, and it flourished. And what happened was, over the years, over the centuries, millennia, the form changed, adapted, but then it was rediscovered, specifically in the context of seeking a nationalist identity in colonial India. So it's impossible to talk about the history of Bharatanatyam and gloss over the history of the Devadasi. It's a very complex phenomenon. And in general, it is understood with extremely faulty cultural boundaries, at best. I mean, you'll still, if you search Devadasi and you do a Google search, you're going to see loads and loads of primarily Christian missionary websites which will talk about the ills, and I'm not saying they're wrong, but cause and effect is a question, is a bit of a question. I'll come to that in a bit, but the earliest references to Devadasis or temple dancers has been in texts around 6th century AD. And Sadir, which is the name of Bharatanatyam back in 6th century, was described in an ancient Tamil epic called the Silapadigaram, the Tale of the Anklet. Again, I don't have time to go into the details of that, but in that particular text, the daughter of the hero actually learns this dance form, performs it, and is celebrated. Definitely not looked down upon, very much celebrated. So during the medieval period, and during the Chola period, Devadasis, these dancers, were unique, given that they were mostly female. They were respected and celebrated members of society. They were educated in the sense of reading. I mean, they read literature, which was not necessarily true for most women. They were skilled in literature, in composition, in music, in dance, multiple instruments they used to play, and multiple languages, including Sanskrit, which is like Latin. So it is the language of theology. And they were completely well versed in those. And they were empowered, and I use the word empowered, understanding that it's a double-edged thing. But they were empowered to be free from the confines of a traditional monogamous marital relationship. How much of it was power, how much of it was then exploitative, I cannot know. Maybe it's a romantic ideal that they were empowered and that they were not exploited. Certainly, by the time it came down to the 18th century, they were exploited. There's no question about that. They possessed property rights, and this is actually unique because women did not own property, not even in the Western world until the late 1900s. These women were owning property, they were given land and a purse, and they bequeathed it matrilineally. It was not through their husbands or partners, it was through them. The name on the land and the purse was the name of the original Devadasi to whom the land was given, either by the temple due to her great service or by the king and the royal courts. So in general, there's little or no doubt that a lot of the Devadasis enjoyed extremely high elite status in society. But what happened was we certainly know a lot of what happened post-17th century, and their British colonial takeover of all the small little rulers and principalities of India. That happened. The Victorian morality took over, and it was considered to be abominable that a woman would dance in public. They were called the Nautch girls. You'll see the word Nautch referred to in any British Raj era texts even today. And the British banned it, actually, the dancing, holding dances in public. And the Hindu temples, which used to receive a lot of the support and patronage from the local rulers, they lost their support as well. So they were not able to support the dancers either. So as a result, the temple dancers had nowhere to go. There was no place that they could really go dance in public. And they needed some patronage. So the patronage was often private merchants or even some of the British regimentals who would use these women, let's say, as prostitutes. So, but that's really what happened. And so by the time we come to the end of the 20th century, the 19th century, and early 20th century, pre-independence India, India got its independence in 1947 from the British. But in the early 1920s and 30s, this dance form was purely associated with women who sold their bodies. So the dance itself, nobody saw it, and frankly, the women didn't have time or energy or space to actually pursue the artistic element because they were busy trying to survive. In this context, we had reformers who were often educated in the Western system. They were upper caste. I won't go into the caste system in India because that's a whole other talk, but they recognized the dance form. They recognized how much information, how much aesthetics was embedded, but getting lost. So they wanted to revive it. And this was part of us seeking our own nationalist identity. What is India after the British? This is part of that. So our music, our cultures, our literature, our languages, our dance. And this was one of them. It was one of the earliest ones that was sort of revived. It was reborn, reimagined. There are lots of re's that I can use, but certainly the Bharatanatyam that we see today is a result of 20th century Reformation. It is not necessarily, nor can we know how it was danced back in 2000 years ago. Rukmini Devi Arundale, whose picture is there on the left-hand side of the screen, she was married to a theosophist and she traveled widely with him. He was a Britisher called George Arundale. And she met Anna Pavlova in Mumbai when she came for a performance of the Bolshoi. And she said, oh, I want to learn ballet. And she went and learned ballet for a year and a half. And then Anna Pavlova said, why are you learning ballet? What does that have to do with India? Why don't you learn all these beautiful dance forms that you already have embedded in your culture? So then she went and she learned Bharatanatyam. And the story goes that when she first went and asked this teacher to teach her Bharatanatyam, he said, no way at all am I teaching you this thing because people will throw stones at me. Because it's associated with such a sort of low class or it was considered to be untenable to teach a decent upper class woman this dance form. But she apparently just sat outside and said, no, you have to teach me. And she kept going to his house every day for almost a week. And then finally he gave up and said, okay, but we have to do it secretly. So then she learned from him almost secretly for a year and a half. And then she did a debut performance in this very prestigious stage, the Music Academy in Chennai, which is equivalent, I would say, to Carnegie Hall in the US. So a very prestigious stage. She came and performed this dance form, and then people sort of like, oh, these are the possibilities of this dance form. So almost with that one thing, she sort of uplifted and made okay to learn this dance form, to perform this dance form, and I think is in many ways responsible for the extreme popularity of this form today. So what did she do? She removed all of the elements in Bharatanatyam, which over long years through the Devadasi tradition had all kinds of very, very human ideas in them. They were not necessarily mythological, but she removed all of those. A large part of the repertoire also had, what we call Shringhara, a woman in love. Lots of romantic love themes were explored. She removed almost all of those and just reimagined everything through devotion, bhakti. So that was, everything was sublimated. Then she eliminated any movement in the vocabulary that was designed, that may have been, I don't say was designed because who knows, but may have been designed to engage the male gaze on a female body. So anything that would be moderately titillating, out. And then she recreated a very strong sense of aesthetic geometry, which she derived from ballet. So strong sense of lines. So at the same time, we have Srimati Balasaraswati, whose picture we show on the right side of the screen. She was descended from a long, unbroken tradition of Devadasis. And she learned the dance, and it was taught very differently to her. It's just mother to daughter to aunt to niece, that sort of, it's a family affair. Everybody knows, they teach it, you learn more and more, you discover, you add to the repertoire. So it's different than how Rukmini Devi eventually created her pedagogy, which was very much textual. It was all these rules and tenets and a particular curriculum of how you go through. That's not how Bharaswati necessarily learned it. Of course, there's a curriculum of training your body, but she learned it through praxis. It's just lineage. But both of them ended up in the same place, which is effectively you wanted to get to a place where temple dancers danced to reach that, what we call moksha in India, which is salvation. So it's about aesthetic rapture. It's really reaching a place where you are in a state beyond and outside of your own body. So it's a mystical experience of bliss, and that's where Bharatanatyam or any Indian classical dance form eventually aims to get to. So now let's come into the vocabulary, and I'll have to rush through this because this is where I'll stop talking and I'll start showing some stuff. So there are two major texts that we today refer to as laying down the rules of our dance form, Natya Shastra, which is this 2nd century AD text, and Abhinaya Darpanam, which is maybe more like 8th century AD, but again, at least 1,000 years old, all of these. But they have loads of information on how you must do things. And so we have these building blocks, the Nritta, which is abstract dance, so no meaning is conveyed as such. It's just geometric shapes and patterns that we set to specific rhythms. And then Abhinaya, which is a big part and difficult to sort of teach actually, because you need life experience to be able to draw on how to express certain emotions. You have to have gone through some experiences to be able to play certain characters. But we still have a bunch of stuff where we use hand gestures, which is a very complex language. It's kind of like American Sign Language, but a little bit more complex than that. And then we have the rasa theory, which are the 9 major emotive states. And the interesting part is, by empirical observation, they've come to a point where they'll tell you how to make certain movements, breathe in particular ways. So even if you're not in that state, you will end up in that state. So how to become angry, flare your nostrils, breathe hard, make your eyeballs big, and just do that for a little bit, and before you know it, you're angry, without knowing why. So the idea is that there's prescriptions of physical things you can do to reach certain emotive states. And it's quite brilliant, actually, how they managed to get us into those emotive states. So the main idea is that this dance is not meant just for entertainment. The idea was that the temple dancers especially, and even today we perform on a proscenium stage, but we still end up, for the most part, exploring ideas and philosophies and trying to convey meaning. I really want to draw on this because I have a lot of modern dance friends, collaborators, who often tell me that in modern dance, the meaning is whatever you take away from it. There's no intended, not a specific, I mean, the dancer may have their intent, but they don't necessarily need you to take that meaning away. I would say that I contrast that with Indian classical dance because we have a specific meaning that we are trying to convey. And it would be great if the audience walked away with that meaning. Very often in Indian framework, that meaning was from the common stories. It's sort of like if you go and watch a performance of Nutcracker or Sleeping Beauty or Cinderella, they don't need to tell you what they're doing in every scene. You know the story, so you understand the meaning, whether or not it's actually evident through the dance or the sets. It's something similar. Most of the mythological stories most people knew, so the meaning that we were conveying was understood. It's just some nuances there that were added on by the dancer. And I will say, it's a non-didactic. It's not like thou shalt do this and thou shalt do that. It's much more of a, here, let's go and watch a story and hopefully something stays with us in terms of the philosophical bent of that story. So now coming to the vocabulary, we start with the namaskaram, which is a paying obeisance. So, as you can see, we dance bare feet, and we dance on the ground, and we think of Earth as Mother Earth. So we start by saying, Mother Earth, please forgive us because we are about to stamp on you. Also, please support us because we can't be stable without her support. And then we ask for the blessings of the divine, the blessings of the long lineage of teachers who have left this wonderful art form for us to inherit. And then we ask for the blessings of the audience so that they can come with us on the journey that we're about to embark on. So this namaskaram is done in every class at the beginning and the end, in every performance at the beginning and the end, whether it's done on stage or backstage, it doesn't matter, but it will be done. So how do we do it? We start with a couple of hand gestures. Kitta, takka, takka, thimmi, takka, channu, takka, thimmi, takka, channu, takka, thimmi, takka, channu, tarikita tom, tarikita tom, tarikita tom. So that's the first movement bit. Every child will learn this on the first day of class, how to do namaskaram. Child, adult, whenever, it depends on when you come to the dance form. And coming on to what defines this dance form as opposed to others. So the linear geometry is what defines Bharatanatyam today. So when I say linear geometry, it's mostly lines, triangles, but the line, the axis is usually centered and aligned about the center. So we have three stances. Samam, which is centered and straight. Aramandi, where we create a diamond shape with a turnout. It's somewhere between a plie and a full grand plie. And the prescription says the distance between the belly button to the earth and the belly button to the head should be equal in the perfect Aramandi. As you can imagine, this is terrible on your knees. But regardless, that is the position of Bharatanatyam. And then the last one is Murumandi, where you fully sit. So these three positions, when you see them, especially when you see them executed properly, that defines the aesthetic geometry of Bharatanatyam. So a lot of the time, these are the shapes we are creating in space. So from there, I'll move on to the Adava system. And these are a series of steps. And depending on whether, the different schools of, just like you have the Russian School of Ballet and the Balanchine School of Ballet, and I'm sure there are loads of other schools, American School of Ballet, etc. Each one has slight differences. So there are lots of stylistic differences in different schools of Bharatanatyam. So the Aduva system, the steps, building blocks may change a little bit, but for the most part, they'll all have some of the ones that I'm showing you today. The first one is simply designed for you to get comfortable moving in this seated position. So these are called tattadavas, and tattu means to strike. So we just strike and we go thalang kutakadi kutakata dinginatom tai ya tai ya tai ya tai tari kittatom, and second speed tai ya tai ya tari kittatom tai tari kittatom tam. So I did the step in 3 speeds. The first speed is what sets the pace. The second speed is exactly double. It's a mathematical double of the first. The third speed is a mathematical double of the second, hence 4 times as fast as the first. So every step has to be practiced in all 3 speeds. So this sort of striking, where we stay seated and we try not to move the hips. So the tendency is to want to do this. And remember, we said in Bharatanatyam, we've removed anything that might look somewhat lascivious. So hip movements are not allowed in Bharatanatyam. So we cannot go tai, ya, tai, ya, tai. You can imagine. Is that aesthetic? I think so. But is that Bharatanatyam? No, we're not allowed. So these are the kinds of movements that have been removed from the vocabulary. So in this particular series, there's 8 of them, or 5 of them, depends on the school. And what happens is often, all we are doing here is learning how to strike in different combinations. So the second one of what I just showed you was right, left, right, left. Then you can go right, right, left, left. Then you can go right, 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 left, left, left. Boring, you just keep repeating one side. So after a while, it's like, how long am I doing this? But it's just so that you can get stable. Your body gets used to developing the muscles around your quads, your hamstring, you open out, you develop the strength around your knees. Our knees get really impacted in this dance form so that you can stay down and move. And then I'll show you the 7th one where there's a little difference. So here we go 1, 2, 3 on the starting leg, 4 on the other leg, 5, 6, 7 on the starting leg again, and lift and prime so that you can go on to the other one. So I'll just quickly illustrate the first and the second speed. Kitta, takka, tai, yum, tat, tai, tam, and tai, yum, tat, tai, tam, and tai, yum, tat, tai, tam, tai, yum, tat, tai, tam, tai, yum, tat, tai, tam, tai, yum, tat, tari, kitta, tom. And it'll go on to third speed, but I'm not going to do it just because I can't speak. And okay, I've realized that I've gone way over time. Okay, I'm just going to keep going and see how much I can show you because I feel like showing is better. I'll just illustrate the next series, which is Naatadavu, where we extend and start using extensions of the foot. In this particular series, we take positions which are this way, extending in the front, all the while keeping our hips stable as far as possible. So that was 1 out of like 9 or 10. I did it in 3 speeds. I'm just going to play it again and do the 8th one of this, which is slightly more complex. So this series of steps is called Natya, which means to extend. I'll maybe quickly show you one Tirmanam, which is a finishing step. Somehow in Indian music and in Indian dance, we use sets of 3. It's called Tihai in the north, and it's called Tirmanam in the south. So everything repeats in sets of 3. But the arithmetic pattern of that can change. So the one that I'm going to show you is one where you go 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Thalam kutakate kutakata dingena tom tak ting genna tom tak ka tak ting genna tom tak ka de ko tak ting genna tom tak ting genna tom tak ka tak ting genna tom tak ka de ko tak ting genna tom tak ting genna tom tak ka tak ting genna tom tak ka de ko tak ting genna tom tak ting genna tom tak ka tak ting genna tom tak ka de ko tak ting genna tom tak ting genna tom tak ka tak ting genna tom tak ka de ko tak ting genna tom tak ting genna tom tak ka tak ting genna tom tak ka de ko tak ting genna tom tak ting genna tom tak ka tak ting genna tak ka de ko tak ting genna tom tak ting genna tom tak ka tak ting genna tak ka de ko tak ting genna tom.
Okay, I'm going to change tacks and move on to, because we don't have time to finish everything, maybe move on to the hand gestures, which all of you can possibly participate in from your seats. So this forms the building blocks of the expressive element of the dance. So on the top of the screen, I've written a shloka or a chant that we like to say, which is Yatho hasta tatho drishti. Where the hand goes, the eye follows. Yatho drishti tatho manaha. Where the eye goes, the heart follows. Yatho manas tatho bhavam. Where the heart is, feeling, emotion is created. And where emotion is, enjoyment is created. For whom? Enjoyment for whom? For the audience, for the dancer, for everybody. The idea is that And when I think about this, I'm going to sort of slip ahead a little bit because we may not have time to cover the last slide. This is I feel like a very important tradition, very important tenet, which really in the modern world allows us to focus. When you are doing something, when you look at what you're doing, it's a way of being into it. And I can tell you as a teacher, when I have students learning this dance form, the number of times their eyes are glued to the mirror right in front. They cannot see, whereas hopefully you saw, even when I'm doing abstract dance, my eyes have to follow. That's part of the dance. If I'm pointing there, my eyes follow there. Pointing back, I follow. Looking down, I look down. Look up, look side, look up. There is a following of the eyes, which is very key. And they say eyes are a mirror to the soul. Eyes are also the biggest visual, biggest sensory information input. So if you focus your eyes on something, you're able to focus your mind. That's the main, I would say, interestingly obvious, but really useful tenet that comes from this. But leaving that shloka aside, moving on to hand gestures. So we have, across various Indian classical traditions, we have more than 2,000 hand gestures, actually, as it turns out. Something that I discovered recently. But the ones that we use in Bharatanatyam and a lot of the Indian classical art forms, there are about 28 plus 4, actually, 32 single hand gestures. And then we have 24 conjunctive, which require both hands. I will just quickly go through them. Feel free to experiment alongside with me and see whether your fingers obey your instructions. So starting with the single hand gestures, you can do them with right or left. For the purposes of today's elaboration, I'm just going to use my right hand. Pataka, Tripataka, bend the ring finger. Ardha Pataka, bend your pinky. Kartari Mukhaha, Mayurasyo, Ardha Chandrascha, Arala, Shukatundakaha, Mushti, a fist, Shikharakyascha, thumb up, raised hand, Kapitta, Katakamukhaha, Suchi, Chandrakala, Padmakosho, Sarpashirastatha, Mrigashirsha, Simhamukhaha, Kangulascha, Alapadmakaha, Chaturo, the number 4, Brahmaraschaiva, a bee, Hamsasyo, the head of a swan, crest of a swan, Hamsa Pakshakaha, the tail feather of a swan, Samdamsho, twinkling in and out, Mukulaschaiva, a closed bud, Tamrachuda, the head of a rooster, Trishulakaha, the trident. These are the 28 single hand gestures. And something as each one of them has delineated uses. They're called vinyogas. So one example would be, let's take the simplest one, pataka. I'll just give you some. So this is a very simple hand, right? There's nothing much to it. The thumb is tucked in, the fingers are all pasted together, the palm is as flat as possible. But the beginning of dance, Natya Rambhe, when we hold in this sort of bow-shaped arm position, the end of the hand is held in the pataka position, so that's Natya Rambhe, beginning of dance. Vari Vahe, to point at the clouds. Vane, the canopy of a forest. Vastu Nishedane, to say no. Kuchastale, to point at the chest. Nishayamcha, to point at nighttime, it's dark. Nadyam, which is the river, so you can show Nadyam, river. Changaragake, to anoint yourself, whether it's be with sandalwood, with soap, with incense. Nripashreshta, to show the best of kings. So as you can see, it's a very simple hand, but with that hand, you can show a lot of things. Another one could be, let's use Katakamukha. This is a Katakamukha hasta. So you can use that to basically show the bow in a bow and arrow to read the, and you can use, there are different versions of the Katakamukha. You can do this and release the arrow. But again, if I just do this and do this, you will not feel anything. The body and the eyes have to get into it. Pull, release. So the eyes accentuate. So when we learn these hand gestures and we learn to use them, that expressional vocabulary gets built into the pedagogy. You learn how to show the emotion associated with. So for example, I just said clouds. If I just do the hand gesture, it means nothing. But in India, clouds usually come at the end of a hot summer, so the monsoon is very welcome. Everybody's waiting for it. The first sign of the clouds is it's a time of joy. So when you look at the clouds, you show the darkness and you say, they are here. There's going to be rain. And you feel the happiness that the monsoon rain at the end of a hot summer will bring to you. So I'm sort of mixing this and the next slide together, which is the hand gestures along with the emotive states. They all work together to build that narrative or storytelling aspect. Very quickly, we'll go to the conjunctive hand gestures, the 24 of them. The first of which almost everybody here will know, Namaste, the Anjali. Anjalischa, Kapotascha, Karkata, Swastikastatha, Dola Hasta, Pushpaputaha, Utsanga, Shivalingakaha, Kataka Vardhanaschaiva, Kartari Swastikastatha, Shakatau, Shankha, Chakrecha, Samputa, Pasha, Kilakau, Matsya, Kurma, Varahascha, Garudo, Nagabandakaha, Khatva, Bherundakakyascha, Avahittas Tathaivacha. These are the 24 double hand gestures. Out of curiosity, what do you all think this means? Anyone? Does this look like anything? Okay. What if I were to do this? Does this remind you of anything? Drinking, yes. What is this thing likely to be that I'm drinking from? It's supposed to be a conch shell. Does this look like a conch shell? It's now that I tell you, it does. So one of the Hindu trinity, the Lord Vishnu holds a conch shell in one hand and a discus in the other. So the shankha and the chakra become part of the vocabulary. So a lot of the things that we have developed hand gestures for are things that are relevant and significant in Hindu mythology. Then I'm just going to kind of skip quickly ahead so that I give you at least 5 minutes to ask questions, which is identity. Before I go on to that, maybe, I just wanted to show, all of this time we've been talking about women dancing. This art form is by no means occupied by women. I want to show you somebody who's a brilliant male dancer, and what he's showing is Shiva and Shakti. He's showing this Ardhanari, which means half man, half male, half female god. And he's contrasting the two sides. And you'll see the male, on the left side you'll see the female.
Namah Shivaya. Namah Shivaya. Namah Shivaya. Namah. Champeya Gaurardha Sharira
She is colored in the rose petals, pink color.
Karpura Gaurardha
He is resplendent like camphor on the right. She has beautiful long tresses and he has matted hair on the right. We bow to both the female and the male aspect of the god. Okay, I will stop there finally and see if, I know it's beyond your class, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Go to your next class, that's fine, but if you'd like to stay and ask questions or come up to the stage, please do so.